one really important meeting that we have that's open to anyone who has an interest is our Science of Patient Engagement Symposium. That is, many of our meetings are kind of for membership. This is one that's open to anyone in this kind of science community. And I think and that's held in the spring, in May in Washington, D.C. And we're just now finalizing that preliminary program. We are going to focus on the science of patient engagement as it relates to the innovation sector. So I think it would be amazing to start to engage with your listenership that can start to help us populate maybe even some of the programs that we bring forward by next spring.
Hey everyone, this is Ty with the Med Design Podcast, where we hear compelling stories from medical innovators who are making an impact in healthcare. And today we're about to talk with Randy Rutta, who is CEO of the National Health Council. Wow. If you're not familiar with the NHC, this is the organizing body for 170 plus groups such as the American Cancer Society, the Amputee Coalition, American Heart Association, just to name a few. And Randy is the head advocate for patient advocates everywhere. What I think you will find so exciting about this conversation is our shared belief that patient advocates have a role to play in innovation, and not just as a passive recipient, but in helping to prioritize what problems get addressed and in making sure the medical technologies of tomorrow truly serve the needs of patients, as well as other stakeholders in healthcare. So I'm looking forward to an exciting conversation. Hello, Randy, and welcome.
Hi, Ty. Good to see you.
Good to see you as well. Let's just jump into it. I know you're leading what is a 100-year-old organization called the National Health Council.
Correct.
Tell us about that. What is the organization?
Sure, I'd be happy to. You're right. The legacy organization, but with a mission that's been consistent ever since the AMA and the Nurses Association and others suggested that there needed to be an organization that advanced the voice of the patient. So we're unique. We were founded then for and are operating with patients. We're dedicated to bringing together the entire health ecosystem, always with the majority of our member organizations being patient organizations. We've got just shy of 200 national organizations that are participating in the National Health Council currently. As I say, the majority of whom are going to be patient groups that you would recognize: American Cancer Society, Heart Association, also, lupus, arthritis, Crohn's foundations, and then smaller rare disease or low incidence groups, as well as the care teams around them: physicians, nurses, pharmacists, researchers, academics, and then a fair number of member organizations that are actually in business and industry. Because our view is that it's going to take all of us together to understand the patient experience and how to improve and build on what we currently see today for tomorrow's cures, tomorrow's ability to live independently. So, as I think about it, our goal is to create a equitable and patient-centered health system. And we really want to prioritize patient needs and the strength of the patient voice, really honor the lived experience that patients and their families, bring to any conversation. And the message is really simple for us. It's ensuring that patients are involved in decisions that affect their health in every part of the decision-making process, and that engagement is respectful, supported in terms of patients' understanding. So what's the conversation I'm having and how might I process that for myself? And then one of the things that I always share with any potential partner, certainly that's true in the innovation space, it is never too early to engage patients or the patient's community. And in part, it's because many times, people who aren't patients themselves don't know what they don't know. And so they get the best benefit very early on of that patient perspective and the family members around them. But the other piece is optics. For patients, much like other parts of the community that have really had to press the system to be heard, there's a mantra called "nothing about us without us." And that's something that the disability community has fostered. It's something that the patient community has fostered. And that's all the more reason why you don't want to start engaging the patients or any of these stakeholder communities too far down the path, even if you want to do some good faith pre-work, because to them, it's going to feel like they're an afterthought or they've missed an opportunity to be at the table for the get-go. But I think we share kind of that sensitivity, you and I, from our past conversations. And that's really at the core of how the National Health Council views its work and tries to add value.
Questions was and of course, our take is that you should lead with empathy to the stakeholders.
Right.
And that's it. At least I've found in practice markedly different than maybe the practice of most innovation in healthcare, which tends to be more
Right.
of a technology push. And then at some point in time, the stakeholders get involved, but usually it's a tech first approach. And we're trying to promote a empathy first approach, which I think maybe we can then touch on kind of this history of this, of
Mhm.
maybe the roles that I guess, like rather than have the patients be brought in later, but rather what roles do patients have to play with innovation, and how long has this called a trend? How long has this trend been going?
Well, it has been a trend, and I think we are making progress. But the healthcare system, the innovation system that supports healthcare, is complex. It's diffused, and it doesn't always align relative to why are this group of people working together for this purpose. If you're in the operating room and it's a critical care team, that's very centered on that operation to save that person's life. If it's a group of individuals with terrific tech backgrounds, they might be brainstorming about, well, what about this? And they get very excited and take it forward. But we know as a traditionally, patients, patient advocate groups have really had to push hard to be on top of mind, to be included in those early conversations. It hasn't become natural, I think. And that's not a criticism. That's just human nature in many ways. And so what we're really looking forward is for in the health innovation space, you know, um, in the past, maybe it was a more limited role. It was checking in after the fact. It might have really only come to bear when a particular innovation was moving down the path of FDA approval. And so there's a expectation on the part of FDA to include patients. And at that point, it oftentimes feels like a scramble. That's a point at which you might find criticism from a patient saying, just now you're asking my opinion when you need to check a box. So I think that's part of what our experience has been. But the patient community, despite that experience, is really leaning in to be at the table, to be present, to be a good faith contributor to understanding a challenge, and then saying how might brilliant minds try to help fix that challenge. So we have seen that shift, both for patients and advocates, really, being valued in this conversation with innovators and others. Um, the currency that they're bringing to the table is both their lived experience. How is it that this intervention will help me lead a more healthy and engaged life? And that's why it's so important to ask the patient, because sometimes someone who's not the patient says, well, of course, they want this goal. They want to achieve this. And patients, oftentimes, it's oftentimes accurate, but then oftentimes they'll say, I just want to sleep through the night. I just don't want to have to go to the bathroom so many times that it might be. I don't want to have a device or an intervention that is uncomfortable to wear or, those kinds of things. So it's just kind of just asking, as you said, starting from a point of empathy and just asking the question, how would you describe your life today? What might be better if we could address those issues? And then start that learning journey together. More and more companies, more and more, startup innovators are becoming sensitized to that. So the role we need to play as the National Health Council and our members is make sure that we're beating that drum. We're trying to create that level of understanding and interest, and then try to make it as easy as possible for those individuals, those teams of innovators to then say, well, if I'm going to do that, what does that mean? And how do I find patients? And, and it might not be, it might be patients alongside their clinicians. The only other thing I would mention, Ty, is, the way the healthcare system is set up, sometimes from an innovator perspective, you clearly have an idea about what could be valuable to bring forward. But oftentimes it's the way in which healthcare in this country is paid for that then starts to influence who the end user might be. Everyone agrees it's the patient, but not every instance you have the patient as the purchaser. And I think innovators at a certain point of time go from being excited about the technology and their ideas to then starting to say, we're going to have to make this real. Who do we need to start talking to? Those are different conversations, but I say you will always be more effective in those conversations if you have a patient at your side. And you say, patients have been with us all along. That represents X number of hundreds of thousands of individuals whose lives are stuck. You can make an argument, but have that really literally backed up side by someone who is living that reality.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, if you can show impact, if you can show changed outcomes, and if
Right.
you've got a patient who is dramatically preferring a solution you've come up with, one case in point is our work with Couplet Care, which is a postnatal infant bassinet, and
Right.
it's designed from the grounds up with moms in mind, which all the other hospital bassinets are truly designed for nurse or pediatrician to stand over the infant, and for moms, it's an incredibly painful experience. And so,
Right.
having that as our north star there from a patient first approach really has driven a lot of the design details and really produced a north star there with extensive feedback and research from moms as well as
Absolutely.
nurses. So, yeah, absolutely.
That's such a perfect example of, and you can just see it in your mind. And I've had the opportunity to see some of the videos and kind of see, information that you've built around that particular innovation, and it's just brilliant. And it's brilliant in its simplicity, and but the impact, what it meant for the nursing teams, not being in and out of the room, every few minutes, what it meant for the mom, like you say, painful as they're recovering from, the delivery process and try to then hold and bond with their babies. It's great for the babies. That is an example that's so clear. And let's start with observing just what the experience is of these new moms, their babies, and the staff around them, and just bringing an idea like that. That probably to me, it's like, oh, that's such a simple solution. But then we want those moms through organizations like ours, who they're representing a maternal and child health perspective. They're working with, OBGYN and pediatrics. We want to be able to tell that story to the health administrators that may be the ones making the decision as to, so is this a piece of equipment that we want to bring into our setting of care? And how is that then become part of our offerings? How do we pay for that? So that's where having that patient fully aligned to say, well, however you figure that part out, know that this is a big deal to us. And it will lead to healthier outcomes, fewer readmissions, all the kinds of things that could follow, when it's not an optimal approach. So I applaud you guys for that innovation.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, that's definitely been a labor of love. So you were just at the Advocacy conference and HLTH.com, and there was one
Right.
more, and there was one more you mentioned.
I actually, right before HLTH.com, it was the CHI Summit, the Coalition for Health AI,
Okay.
held their summit. They do that every a couple times every year, and they're at a critical point in their decision making. And then others, I think to your point, Ty, there's been more and more interest. The Peterson Health Technology Institute has convened, a wonderful group of collaborators that include people who are academic experts in how do you measure value, to clinicians, to everyone, including patients. And so there is a sense of momentum in this space. But having the innovators themselves, the people with that one or two good ideas that want to bring that forward, is where it starts. And
Mhm.
so it's been great. It's been great.
Well, and maybe chai would be a good example. I mean,
Uh huh.
AI is having a indelible impact on healthcare. How do you see, I guess, maybe patient-centered innovators, like with, say, AI solutions, for example? How are you seeing that interface starting to emerge? Or it doesn't have to be AI as the technology du jour, but how do you see kind of that playing out now?
Well, AI is as good an example as anywhere, because that's all the parts are moving right now. Is we're all trying to figure out, how do we create a system, call it a shared understanding, call it guardrails. It kind of depends on your perspective. But how do we create a shared sense of understanding that then is reflected in the business practices of both the innovation sector, the approval processes, and others that the FDA is going to honor? How is that then reflected in that handoff to codes and coverage that then allow those devices to be actually available to patients? And as an aside, that's a serious concern for us right now. When you ask any of our patient organization members, with all the complexity that might exist in the healthcare community, all the wants that we might bring to the table with our wish list, access remains the number one concern, because patients just aren't able to benefit fast enough, consistently enough, well enough, maybe flex how it is they're being treated for their particular disease. simply because of the way the system is designed. Right now, the average device after approval at the FDA is still 7 years away from
Mhm.
being authorized, as you know, and that's just kind of a midpoint, right? Being authorized to actually be available then to patients. Patients in the National Health Council and its membership have been and are going to step up our advocacy for trying to help those two parts of our healthcare ecosystem come together a little closer. And we're not just although we're interested in and focusing on interacting with our colleagues at CMS who are overseeing Medicare and Medicaid, but we're very much in concert with and speaking with the employers and the healthcare purchasers. It's still just shy of 70% of people have their health coverage in the private sector through their
Mm.
employer. And employers are investing in a healthy workforce, both for the people that report to work and then their dependents. And, they've seen their costs go up, but they're not necessarily hearing back from, their employees that they've had a great healthcare experience, or they're not necessarily even understanding how to measure that value. That's a place for us to just have that conversation. And I think when it comes to the technology sector, when it comes to the various ways in which these interventions can help support someone, and as you know, it might be implantable, it might be a wearable, it might be a piece of technology itself, it might be a diagnostic device or a medicine, administration device or a monitoring device. It's such a broad range of innovation that's occurring. We want to be a part of that conversation to say, involve patients in all those decisions, and then create a pathway in concert with their clinicians and other decision makers to make that innovation as accessible as possible to those patients so they can start to benefit. And I have to think that the people that you're close to who bring those good ideas forward, that's ultimately what is driving them as well. How soon can we refine something to see it make a difference in someone's life, like a mom who can actually pick her baby up herself and have that baby right there with her?
Yeah, I mean, you think about the potential impact that some of these transformative technologies can have, and it can be frustrating that you miss those opportunities to change an outcome for a patient in a specific situation because it takes so long to have that get
Right.
to market. So I think that's kind of a ongoing frustration, right? And
Sure.
yeah, I think there's
It's an
some
opportunity.
mechanism. That's right. Yeah, if you can figure out a better mousetrap to bring this to
There you go.
market,
Hmm.
then I think that starts to short circuit some of these
Right.
impediments that are in place. But
But you
one
asked,
of
Ty, I
those,
was just going
go
to
ahead.
come back to your question though, because I kind of wandered. But you asked about chai. So chai is at a critical point right now. That coalition was founded, well before COVID. They've been really
Mhm.
anticipating the value of being able to move forward together with all the different stakeholders around AI and how it's used in all parts of healthcare. They basically set some goals for that anything that emerges in healthcare be trustworthy, be responsible, and ultimately deliver a health benefit to patients. Sounds like a no-brainer. Where you see the different systems being applied, it might be more in the administrative side. How do we make scheduling more efficient? How do we provide more information to patients through chatbots and other kind of means?
Mhm.
One of the biggest innovations that's emerging right now are the ambient listening device systems that
Mhm.
doctors in their doctors' offices and exam rooms can use, so that the AI-based tool is basically taking notes for the physician. They can look up from their iPad and have eye contact with their patients. And that means everything. We did a research
Mhm.
study about shared decision making for patients. And guess what? It came back saying the number one thing is having a relationship with my clinician. That's going to help me feel calm. It's, and comfortable and being able to contribute. And you get better health outcomes as a result. So what Chai is doing is looking to say, so how do we create expectations for how these algorithms and the models that they're embedded in come forward? So they have a whole series of work streams that are bringing together technical people, all the different stakeholders, including patients. It's in the early stages, so really just assessing generative AI, predictive AI. They just are launching the direct-to-consumer work stream, where that's, of course, a big stake spot for us to be able to have a recommendation for a certification process for assurance labs that give the innovators a clear sense of, well, here's what the expectations are going to be that are going to serve you well over the life cycle of what you're hoping to create. And it'll do so with the different stakeholders feeling like I've got input, I'm weighing in at the right time. Well, they're going to have work streams that look at clinical decision making, public health applications, applications in insurance and in the workplace. And so in each of those places, I'm ringing that single bell. Be sure to include patients and include them early. That's my mantra, and there's a receptivity to that. So,
Well, and you touched on this once or twice, but I'm
uh huh.
curious, like maybe for what's the most effective way for an entrepreneurial health innovator, let's say, to be able to collaborate with a patient advocacy organization or finding kind of the right mix of patients to like engage with early, and I guess maybe yeah, how might we figure out how to access those people?
Well, part of the role of the National Health Council is to be that bridge, to be that connector. So I think it'll depend on, the idea that a person might have who wants to bring something forward. Is it anchored in a technology? And then they need to just kind of see, well, where might this fit with different patients that might have different kinds of disease experiences? Or if they already know, and that oftentimes comes from either knowledge they've gained, maybe it's a family member, maybe it's themselves that have been affected by a particular condition. Then what we would look for is, well, are you working with those patient groups that represent the patients in that space? And then we're trying to help those patient organizations to have an understanding about how they might successfully interact. But Ty, I think you're aware many of our patient organizations are actually pretty far down the path of being receptive to working with individuals, and it might be individuals who are in more established, tech innovation spaces, or someone who's just kind of coming out of their garage to say, I've been working on this. And then we say, okay, well, here's some of the things you're going to want to add to your description around
Mhm.
evidence and all those things. But so I would say, think about what is your idea and where will it intersect with the patient community, and then how can you connect with that patient community to test your hypothesis, to get, feedback. So the National Health Council, great place to connect. We do these monthly meetings on the AI space on AI. As you know, we're, talking to your organization and others like your organization to be more visible and accessible. But we welcome a call from anyone at any stage, and then we will start to match that individual to the organization. At the same time, we're building some kind of system structures that help then our patient organizations have these conversations, learn from each other, be more ready. What are the 10 tips for welcoming an innovator to lunch and kind of exploring it? We're really trying to make it easy and then have the sequence of sophistication or complexity kind of laid out so that people understand what that is and why. Why would I invest this energy at this point in time? And for startups, for innovators, they have so much ahead of them. So maybe it's a lighter touch, just understanding that it is important. But then as they start to move toward things that are particularly more in the regulatory environment or even in the investment environment, talking to investors about it, that's where then the engagement becomes maybe a little higher level, a little more sophisticated. But we're trying to build the body of evidence, the best practices, peer-to-peer supports, and are in the early stages, but we have enough to be able to help anyone who's ready to start that journey.
Yeah, well, and I've already just appreciated your willingness to do that with, as you mentioned, kind of a like new technology coming out of the garage that would be transformative and making the right connections to kind of figure out how to bridge the gap with a special situation. I think those are
Absolutely.
so helpful. And I think you touched on something I think is really important is to do expectation management with just
Right.
because you have an idea, that 7-year roadmap to actually get it to market.
Right.
Something you don't want to build up. I guess expectation this is going to show
Hmm.
up and be available for your reimbursement codes tomorrow. That there's a
That's
path
right.
to that. Yeah.
Yeah, there absolutely is. So I think if the National Health Council, I would invite anyone who's experiencing this podcast to go to our website, take a look at the resources that are there. We will be increasingly tailoring those for this specific audience. So right now they're going to have to say, okay, I see these, different ways in which patients can be engaged and how that's measured. And if we say we're using the National Health Council's fair market value calculator to compensate those patients for their input, that's going to be good. They're probably going to have a conversation either with us or with a patient organization that's based to say, so help me build a tailored, customized plan, a bespoke plan for how I take my piece forward. But you know what? It's not overly complex. They're already doing the hard work in the science, in the materials, in the back, maybe it's AI or the other tech that might be involved in this space, the interfaces and the platforms. That is knowledge that the patient community rarely has. Some of our larger organizations, we have across our membership, chief science officers, chief medical officers, research leaders. It's a pretty sophisticated bunch. Hopefully we can connect you with those. But what we'll certainly lead with is the piece that we know best. And we'll do that by introducing you to the patients that ultimately is the motivation for being in the space.
Yeah, and I definitely appreciate, just to touch on the fair market value calculator.
Mm-hmm.
Because I would hate for patients to feel like they, had a seat at the table and didn't get, a fair representation too, with some of the compensation you can earn from participating
Right.
in these studies as well.
So we've developed a system. It's been in place for several years now. It's kind of the industry standard that's being used. A call that I just got off of is talking about that same tool in Europe and how we, try to customize that to different currencies and countries. But at the end of the day, it's just engaging patients and then being ready to support them in that engagement. And it depends on what that is. If it's an early stage focus group or some initial testing as to, one choice versus another, then that's going to be a lighter touch, but you think about the patient. So they're giving up time, oftentimes from their job or their families. That time should be worth something. They may have costs incurred to travel to where you want them to be, those things. So the fair market value calculator just captures those costs and kind of lays out a way in which you can approach that. We certainly want to have patients compensated consistent with these standards. We just updated them for the current economy this summer. But the first step is just being respectful and communicating to the patient that we value you. We understand that your expertise has value in and of itself, and we want to put something in place. So that actually might be something that's started on a smaller scale and builds up, but it'll say so much to the patient that one, you've sought them out, and two, you understand that they're going to be giving up some things in order to be there for you. Clinical trials is different. That's a much more described and involved, oftentimes lengthy process. So there's also a system that you assess compensation in that space. We're actually just working with FDA and others to say, how might we develop a fair market value calculator support system for those companies that are in that journey, because there are a lot of rules and around how it is you can compensate patients. So we want to bring those together and, again, make it easy for innovators to bring their good thinking forward.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you want to put together a solid research plan that gets IRB review. And
Right.
also, you're making sure you're taking care of everybody respectfully who is participating in some of the early stage research that you're doing.
Exactly. I mean, we just yesterday had a conversation with someone whose colleague I met when I was at the Med Tech conference. And it was like at a reception. They said, love to follow up. Well, here's a man who's an engineer by training, very knowledgeable, who has a daughter with some pretty significant disabilities. And as caregivers, he and his family are trying to just understand what's her experience. She's nonverbal. So he's come up with some kind of monitoring platform that could really help parents and others, caregivers, have insights into how's she doing and how might we learn from her experience yesterday to improve her experience tomorrow. Very good faith, very early on. So what he brought to the table was the understanding that we could do better. We could do better in supporting these families and caregivers and the patients themselves. And so we had a conversation about, well, let's talk about IRB. Let's talk about how you might engage patients and reflect that in maybe a publication that then is visible to potential investors or others with a similar idea. So I tell you, come off of a call like that, and I know you're smiling because you have calls like that all the time, and you just feel good about, people wanting to help other people.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Or just like when you see some of the people that participate in the study
Yeah,
then benefit from it. I had the wonderful experience of meeting one of the kids that was in the Bassinet during an early study,
sure.
like standing around a soccer game and like, oh, hey, you were part of this. So it's neat to have those experiences, right?
That's wonderful.
Yeah. Well, maybe looking ahead towards the future, Randy, how do you envision the National Health Council's role in kind of shaping the landscape to make sure
Sure.
that the innovation benefits all of the patients?
Well, our role obviously is to try to marshal the resources within the patient community itself and try to create describe those pathways to make it easier then to all work together to a better result. At the end of the day, what patients are looking for, and when I say patients, it's about 160 or more million Americans who have significant chronic conditions, multiple conditions, disabilities, who are in the healthcare system all the time, as opposed to maybe someone who's a healthcare consumer who's in and out of the healthcare system. Everybody would benefit from the kind of support that I think the innovation community can bring forward. But we're really looking at those people for whom there's a significant investment in their time and energy, their own health, and then the resources around them. So we will always try to get to a point where whatever can be helpful to patients, we would like to see that proven to be safe and effective, have a channel for access, and then have patients have access to that support. You asked me earlier about the MedTech conference. I was blown away by the number of participants there from the innovation community, being startups and individuals who just had a passion, all the way through the major medical device and technology companies that whose names we would recognize. Every single one talked about the value of engaging patients, how to shared stories about how they do it, what models they have. So when you say, well, what's our role? Well, one's being a part of that conversation, bringing back to the patient community those lessons learned. So no one's reinventing the wheel, and then help those companies. So right now, I'm literally going through a process of following up with each of those companies to say, so how are you engaging patients? How might we leverage some tools? How might we leverage our relationship with these patient organizations, formal and informal, to say, let's make an introduction so that we are part of the solution, and certainly either not intentionally or unintentionally just left on the sidelines when there could be real value brought forward. And at the same time, doing that in as a source of information and influence to the regulators and to others that are setting the requirements as to what companies have to meet, either in the early stage or at the latter stage when they're actually ready to go to market. And so we're really trying to bring that same level of patient expertise and investment meaning passion to see this go forward to all of those settings so that in concert, we can go forward together. The time has never been better. And I've been doing this for a long time. And this is a now conversation that everybody seems motivated to go forward together.
That's incredible. No,
It
that's
is.
it's like the excitement's kind of palpable right now. Is like
It's
she's seeing this
great.
phase shift that's happening. Yep.
Yeah, it is.
So just maybe like kind of step back on reflective
Uh-huh.
nature. What are some books you've read recently you might recommend?
I actually have some notes here because I've had some really great engagement with authors. As I mentioned, we have a monthly meeting. It's around AI, and so that's kind of the area of focus for their work to really help our patient community better understand what does AI mean. Really, it's been here since 1956. Oh, that's amazing. Really, 1970s, we've seen it enter into the healthcare system. So part of it's just helping our patient community kind of socialize and become aware of where AI already is. And then what's this very exciting journey that generative AI is starting to set in motion. So I'll just share with you. So we've had speakers come in and help us. One person is Damon Davis, who is just a real thought leader in this space. And as you might imagine, in any consideration we have around the AI community, really about bringing any technology, any treatment forward, we're very concerned about equity and very in different ways. So right now, our system of managing healthcare to make sure people have access to the care that they need that reflects who they are is incomplete, let's say, or inconsistent. If you're a person in a marginalized or minority community, if you're challenged socioeconomically, or if you live in very rural areas, you are struggling to have access both on the innovation side and then actually to the results of that, you're also not very visible within the health data set. And so as we see algorithms pull from a data set to try to help a clinician make a better decision, in the room, if it's only pulling data from one very small set of the population, which is the case now, and you're not part of that population, you run the risk of missing out or actually having bad advice come forward. So everything that we're talking about here, Ty, would have infused in it attention to representativeness, attention to diversity. And of course, the FDA has got guidance that's in the final stages of review that will require that any company bringing something through the approval process demonstrates that the clinical trial process is diverse relative to the patients that are engaged there. So we're working with the patient community to help them establish the skills and the populations to contribute to reaching those goals, even while we're trying to help the innovation community understand what that might look like and kind of how serious some of those gaps clearly are. So Damon's book is called Algorithmic Inequality, Removing Biases and Improving Data for AI in Healthcare. So he is all about helping us understand the pros and cons of AI being used in healthcare generally, including in devices. The FDA has approved more than 1,000, devices that are using AI. He really speaks to how we should pay attention to this issue of just how unrepresentative the current data set is, or even it's not a natural thing for clinicians, researchers, others to necessarily reach beyond those that they're familiar working with. And so one conversation that's come up in AI is that idea about being local. And, I know we're interested in kind of national standards or a framework to understand what would best practice look like. But in any given instance, any use case, it'll have to be local because people look different in different places. They bring different kinds of challenges forward. And so those are the things we're trying to navigate. So I would say Damon Davis's book, definitely a read. He really gets at the data that supports kind of the thinking that we're talking about here. Another one that we've really seen as part of our education process for the patient groups is called Searching for Health. And that's Dr. Kapil Parakh. And, he really has looked at, so where is there reliable information? So he's really looked at this concept of misinformation, gaps in information, what's available online. One of the, so that's one of the things we're looking at. Because one of the challenges we have, and I know your innovation community kind of faces this, is so much data that might be helpful to them. That's the data that they themselves aren't having to generate, but the data that would concern the population or the disease or whatever else, it's siloed within academic research institutions, medical centers, Epic and other data processing platforms, payers will all silo that information, protect it very carefully. Different motivations. It might be patient safety and privacy, security, HIPAA concerns.
Yep, HIPAA is a
It
major
also might,
issue. Yeah.
yeah, well, exactly. Or it might mean that they want to monetize that data in some way. And so it's like, well, gee, I respect that, but where can we find some middle ground to make that data more available? So Dr. Parakh really identifies that. The last one is a book by Dr. Geeta Nair, and it's called Dead Wrong, Diagnosing and Treating Healthcare's Misinformation Illness. And she digs a little bit deeper from the perspective of a clinician and someone who saw her mom really suffer the consequences of the system not being able to get to a diagnosis. And at a certain point, she literally got all the paper records from every visit her mom had ever had, laid them out on the living room floor, and finally started to see where that diagnosis might sit. So she's done a really good job in this book, Dead Wrong, for really understanding what the electronic health record or the data record currently does or does not do for you, particularly when the patient's trying to do the right thing and goes to the internet to supplement that information. So those three resources, I think, could be pretty interesting to, the people that you speak with.
What great books. I'm going to have to dig those out. Thank you so much. Those were some thoughtful book
Absolutely.
titles. Yeah. just as you were talking about like AI topics, the one I've read
Hmm.
recently is called Human-Centered Artificial Intelligence
Right.
by Dr. Ben Schneiderman. And he laid out this framework a while ago, but it was really looking at how do you make sure that, what is it? Humans in the loop is kind of
Correct.
the core mantra there of making sure
Right.
that you're not just building something that just builds separate from the humans, but rather something that enables human activity. So it's really good books, really helpful frameworks in there. So
I think that I'm putting that on my list actually because that's such an important topic in really understanding because from the patient's perspective, it is a human interface. They're dealing with their clinicians. They're meeting with the nurse or other practitioners around those individuals, seeking out that information, and more and more of that information may become automated. But at what point, do you assess how much is kind of augmenting the human in the loop, the doctor, and making his decision or her decision, and then how much of it could be automatic, where we would trust the chatbot to bring the information forward. But I think right now, because these systems are only as good as the data that they're trained on and the experience that they've had, we need to stay close and learn from that. And I think for your innovators, they are doing breakthrough thinking here that's kind of coming forward. I think the imaging area, the ability to read retinal scans, really read scans generally, is almost like it would have been science fiction a few years ago. So that's an area where more and more of the finding is going to really be automated because the systems have gotten to be so good and so smart. But I think in our work with the specialty societies and our work with patients, they still want to know that, in that case, a radiologist or another individual is going to have the benefit of the recommendation from an AI driven system, but then also brings their years of knowledge and maybe their ability to know that patient forward before a final intervention goes forward.
yeah, absolutely. You want to keep that human in the loop as the
Right.
last call. Don't have that accidental, like, kind of like just full control release step. Right.
And to be honest, because some of your innovators may be looking at systems innovations. I mean, what we've been talking about here are more like treatment innovations, but it might be about, how do you schedule nurses more efficiently? I'm sure that conversation occurred after the Bassinet was brought in because it probably changed the availability of these nurses to do other kinds of care, because the mom and the baby were together. I think so. Even in those places where you find that we're looking at AI or just technology advancements, that strengthens systems, scheduling, data delivery to the patient, interactions with the patient, those kinds of things. You're still going to want to have that patient consulted early on. There was a group that was meeting, and they were really looking at systems that would help insurance companies process claims. And they were like, well, they really don't, you don't really need to have a patient weigh in on that. And we're like, well, I think we do because there's probably few decisions that are more important to those patients than, is my procedure, my medicine covered or not covered? And so we having a patient in the loop will help ensure that even those automated systems take into account and are smart relative to what that patient experience ultimately should be.
Yeah, and that's a whole other, ball of wax to dive into with service blueprinting and how do you manage complexity and some of the mix of systems thinking, design thinking, and how those two different domains interface to make smart changes in a complex environment where there's
Right.
unintended consequences of making a change. We wanted to make sure that each stakeholder in the entire service blueprint is thoughtfully considered as you start working through changes in that
Absolutely.
space. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Randy, really appreciate the conversation today. How would you recommend medical innovators get involved with the National Health Council?
Well, I do recommend that they do that. And I think the easiest thing would be to maybe, check out our website, see if there's some aspects of what we're doing that would be of interest to them, and just literally send us an email, contact us. We're building out these resources that are online. Some are really focused on our membership, interactive digital platforms that are really allowing for a lot of information exchange. But then that's expressed through the website or through other programs or tools that are there for anyone to use. In many instances, they would probably be helped most by getting a combination of ideas or resources we have, and then speak to that patient organization that's closest to where they see their innovation making a difference. And so we would kind of help facilitate that matching, process. I think our event, one really important meeting that we have that's open to anyone who has an interest, is our Science of Patient Engagement Symposium. That is, many of our meetings are kind of for membership. This is one that's open to anyone in this kind of science community. And I think and that's held in the spring, in May in Washington, D.C. And we're just now finalizing that preliminary program. We are going to focus on the science of patient engagement as it relates to the innovation sector. So I think it would be amazing to start to engage with your listenership that can start to help us populate maybe even some of the programs that we bring forward by next spring. And then certainly anything that could be helpful before that.
Oh, very cool. So we'll make sure we post a link to that event
Great.
in the show
Okay.
notes. And then if anybody has any suggestions for that event, we'll certainly find a way to help them reach out and get connected.
That would be terrific, because there is an enthusiasm here right now among our patient community, and certainly among the patients themselves, to really engage differently. And we're in a very fluid environment in terms of how is government organized, how are these systems organized. There's a lot of change within the health insurance and the settings of care environment. Dealing with the pressures that they deal with. But kind of through that, we need to make sure that the kind of great ideas and the innovations that your community is ready to surface or ready to take forward has the full support of the patient community. And I would just say, I can't say it enough, involve patients early and see them holistically. First and foremost, it's going to be about how can they work together to address the healthcare need. But then the extent to which other parts of the system need to be influenced, consider that patient a highly invested partner in speaking to the investment community, and speaking to the research community, and helping be an advocate with a medical center or another potential site of a clinical trial, to just assure whoever that decision maker is that patients are really aligned with these innovators taking these ideas forward. And then we'll continue to do the same when it gets to the payment settings or the ways in which these activities are both regulated on the startup side, approval, and then access to market.
Wonderful. Yeah. So thank you for that, Randy. Just one quick comment, then we'll close out, which was,
Sure.
I think with all the change I think we're about to see,
Mhm.
you wouldn't be good innovators if you couldn't adapt to change.
Well, I would say I appreciate that. I think you're exactly right. And we will be learning from you. And that's what this is, such a learning journey. And we're better doing it together. And
Absolutely.
I tell you, the more engagement we have, and it might be through an accelerator program, Shark Tank kind of situation, presentation or a workshop that brings together patients and innovators, that is going to raise the level of awareness and knowledge that will only create, I think, a greater sense of what's possible.
Yeah, very good.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, certainly looking forward to that and having these learning adventures together. So
Absolutely.
very good. All right. Thanks so much for joining us, Randy.
Thank you so much, Ty, for having me.
That was such a fun conversation with Randy. I hope you got as much out of it as I did. Thank you so much for watching. Before you go, please make sure you hit the like button and comment about your favorite part of the episode. And please sure to check out the links in the show notes.